One. Welcome into the install with Greg Cosell of NFL Films. Greg always asks me how I'm doing when the podcast starts, and I never know how to answer it these days, Greg. My emotional state is not dictated by the football team, but the level of play that I'm seeing from the offense is starting to wear me down.
I can understand that feeling and that reaction. And there's a good amount, I think, to discuss about that.
Yeah.
That goes, I think, just beyond the fact that obviously Will Levis is not playing at a high level, but I think there's much more to it than that. We can get into that a little bit.
Yeah, and obviously, that's what this season was always about for them, and there was no way to necessarily predict about how he would take to the offense or whether the coaching staff would be able to figure out how to best maximize him. So I guess that's the obvious place that we should start. They lose Greg 20-17 to the Indianapolis Colts over the weekend. He has less than 100 yards passing. He had 95 yards, which, yardage totals are not the most important thing, but when you have less than 100 yards
Uh,
passing in the modern
95
NFL.
yards passing in today's NFL would is kind of an important thing. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty stinky. Not going to win many football games that way.
No.
So let me not have as, an uneducated reaction. Let me understand what you're seeing from Will Levis in this offense right now.
Well, there's a lot to unpack here. So the audience understands, we don't necessarily plan this conversation. So it's not like I'm sitting here saying, with notes like I'm giving a lecture, go from A to B to C. So I'm going to just kind of the notes I take as I watch, they are a little stream of consciousness. So we'll work through those. And
Yeah.
and as I said, they're not necessarily in any particular order. But what was evident early on is that the coaching staff looked to get Levis comfortable with basically no read simple throws that required no processing and no decision making. That's the way they wanted to try to get him comfortable. As an abstract idea, that's not bad because you want to get completions. What a quarterback wants early in a game is completions. The last thing a quarterback wants is to throw his first seven balls and he's 1 for 7 or 2 for 7 because then he feels like, oh man, can I just complete a pass?
Right.
So the concept that is not unique to how coaches deal with inexperienced quarterbacks. The idea of just giving them basically no read type throws, which are, screens, swing passes. They're no read throws. You just want to get completions. Obviously, you hope maybe that it turns into an 8 yard gain as opposed to a 1 yard gain, but you're looking for completions. So that was the first thing that immediately stood out. Then, as you got a little deeper into the game, um, I would say that the Titans' pass game overall, and this is the part that I think is important to discuss, was kind of elementary and rudimentary in its designs, which is problematic in the sense that it tells you the way they see their quarterback, and that's the problem. So if they're not really allowing Levis to play quarterback the way it is demanded to be played at the NFL level, that says that they have serious concerns about him right now. And the coaching staff did not clearly want it to be more than that as long as the score allowed it to be that way,
Right.
which was much of the game, by the way, obviously. So they were basically protecting Levis, okay? And there's a difference between helping a young quarterback with what you do with your concepts, like the Bears are doing with Williams and the Commanders are doing with Daniels. There's a difference between helping him and protecting him. Okay. They were protecting Will Levis. And that's a problem in and of itself, but it's also a problem unless they've already made the decision. But it's a problem because you need to get to the end of this season to know whether Will Levis is your quarterback. So by protecting him, you're not going to know the answer to that question. Unless, as I said, they feel they already know the answer to that question, which they're not going to publicize if they do.
Right. And they've been asked that question and they've said, at least Brian Callahan has been asked that question and he said, no final determination has been made. So you're correct in that. But like
And you shouldn't say whether one's been made or not. That's not for public consumption.
absolutely. We understand why the messaging is the way that it is. But it's undeniable what you're pointing out, even to the untrained eye, Greg, that they have, reined him in based on what they're
Right.
allowing the offense to be. But that Levis, in the way that he plays when he's at his most comfortable, I would say, is gunslinger, whatever you want to call it, wants to push the ball down the field. And
And
so what I watch when I see him, Greg, is a quarterback that is has had his comfort zone taken away from him and hasn't been able to adapt just yet.
Levis is the kind of quarterback that you have to live with the early mistakes. Now, no coach wants to do that, and no coach takes a job saying, "Oh, we're going to rebuild, and I don't care if we go 4-13." No coach says that, nor should they say that. But Levis, even if you view Levis as potentially being a really good player, he's a certain kind of player. Okay. Levis is not a precision, complete 72% of his passes, boom, boom, boom. He's not that kind of player. I'm certainly not comparing him to Josh Allen, but he's much more of that style of player that is going to ideally make some special plays, but he's also going to miss some things, and he's going to, miss a few here and there. May even through, I know Allen hasn't thrown a pick this year, but the track record, the kind of player Josh has been,
Right.
Levis, he's going to throw some bad picks where you go, ooh, and you just have to move on. But he's certainly not the kind of quarterback that is going to be good if you limit his throws. He needs to feel like he's in the game and can get back there and just whip it. That's who he is, right or wrong. I'm not making it, I'm not saying he should be the guy or not the guy, but that's the style of player he is.
Yeah, and that Greg, I think is at the crux of at least the fan base's frustration, right? Because the season is about determining, okay, whether Will Levis is going to be the quarterback that makes the most sense for this franchise moving forward. And the time that has been spent trying to figure out they're in a lot of one-score games. They've had three out of
Right.
five one-score games, right? But now they're 1-4, and the division, the hour is late, even though it's only the second week or heading into the third week of October at this point in week 7. They're not mathematically eliminated or anything like that, but the
No.
time that it's taken to figure this thing out has cost them valuable opportunities. And now they're looking at 2 road games in Buffalo that I know we're going to talk about today, and following that up with Detroit, which are
Yeah.
not going to be easy things. And there's a real possibility that this football team is 1-6 while they've been trying to figure out
Yeah.
all of these
So
things. And at that point, you have to legitimately, and I know we're not here to do GM stuff today, but you have to legitimately think about trading guys if you're 1-6 ahead of the deadline.
Yeah, so let me give you two other things that I took down with notes that, these are negatives, but you know me, Buck. I tell you what the film shows, okay?
It's
I'm
what
not
it
making
is at
a
this
judgment.
point.
I'm not there every day, so I'm not making a judgment as to what should happen. But Levis, and I think this is why you also need to allow him to play quarterback the way NFL quarterbacks play, is he's still a little slow to process at times. So he has to get consistently quicker with his elimination and isolation. That's the term I use. In other words, eliminating what's not there and isolating where to go with the football within the timing and structure of the play design. If you're a beat late with that, what happens is you get stuck in the pocket, and he gets stuck in the pocket too much. Um, the final point I would make is that he has a tendency to lose vision and coverage clarity the longer he's in the pocket. So what happens is he tries to then make late in the down throws from the pocket where he doesn't really have uh, definition. He has a lack of kind of overall awareness of what the coverage is in relation to where he wants to throw the ball. Okay, so these are things that stand out on tape, but you can't get better at that by not throwing the ball. I mean, so like I said, they may decide, maybe they've decided he's not the guy. But I'll give you an example of what I mean. The interception he threw to Blackman, late in the game, um, that was a perfect example of what I'm talking about because his footwork was really, really bad. See, instead of dropping back and planting his foot, now I don't know if you can see the play in your mind's eye, Buck, but
Absolutely
instead,
can, because we've been talking about it on the radio all week.
okay, so if so people can probably see it as well. When he dropped back, did you notice that he dropped back, stopped, and then kind of hopped back?
Hmm.
Okay, that's terrible because when he hopped back, he lost all his firm base. So he lost the ability to make the throw with core torque and weight transfer and then make the throw. Because if he actually threw the ball on time, Ridley ran by Womack on the out and go. It was cover 3, and Blackman would have been a non-factor in the play if he had gotten back, planted, and delivered on time. But he got back, kind of then hopped back, lost all his lower body strength and weight, and then allowed the rush to potentially become a factor, and therefore had to throw it with no base, and the ball just hung in the air. So it wasn't a bad read. In fact, it should have been a big play.
Yeah.
But, the footwork was so poor that it became a play that I'm sure everybody's acting like, oh my God, why did he throw it? He's stupid. He actually threw it to the right guy. But the poor footwork and lower body balance prevented it from being what it should have been, which was a big play.
And honestly, there's two reasons why people are upset with that play specifically, Greg. One, because of what he said after the fact. I don't know if you knew that he's dealing with a sprained AC joint in his
Right, right, right.
shoulder. He said that if he's healthy, he would think that he would be able to make that throw. He didn't necessarily talk about his mechanics and his footwork that way. The second part of that is because it's a part of, whether it's going to be a sustained regression or something that just happens in a moment, because that reminds me of what Will Levis used to do in college, Greg, because he's an arm strength thrower, or has been an arm
Right,
strength
right.
thrower.
That's
He
correct.
hasn't always had to have those mechanics as a college player. So when I watch that play, I'm like, oh, that's college Levis again. I don't want to see that at this point, 7 weeks in to
Right.
an NFL season, and in year two of this player having been in the league.
Yeah, and again, I'm not there, so I'm not going to comment one way or the other on how
Sure.
he's coached, with mechanics, with all those things. I can tell you from conversations I've had over the years with Mike Martz, who I've known and was good enough years ago when he was the coach of the Rams to invite me to his training camp for 3 days, where I basically was sat in meetings, did whatever I want. He said, "You're a coach, do whatever you want." So I really learned a lot of quarterback from him as well as others, like Bill Walsh, but. Everything is about the mechanics, the fundamentals. It starts there. It's the specifics, the nuances, the details. Like what he did on that play can't happen. It's
Yeah.
one thing to make a bad read. Every quarterback makes a bad read. It's one thing to make an inaccurate throw. Every quarterback makes an inaccurate throw. But at some point, the mechanics, that's something you can control. The mechanics have to be exactly right. The only time they shouldn't be right is if the defense demands that they're not right by pressure. But otherwise, the mechanics need to be right on every single play.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the way it is. And he still struggles with that. And again, I'm not there. So this is no blame, I'm just telling you what the
Sure.
film shows.
That's what it is.
And maybe it's on him. I don't know. I can't speak to that. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that's what we're also trying to figure out here locally. It doesn't matter if you're
right,
here or there, right? We're not in the meeting rooms. We don't know
right,
what's in the guy's head. We talk about this every week, and I think it's compounded, Greg, at this point with
right,
frustrations with the fan base, because it's a day where he's pretty well protected. They
right.
don't allow a sack for the first like
No,
3 damn years, Greg. Like
right.
it's
And the bottom line is, if they've not made a decision, then they got to let them play NFL quarterback and let the chips fall where they may.
yeah,
They're going to Buffalo and to Detroit. They're not going to win those games 10-7. That's not going to happen. You're going to have to score some points. And I like their defense, but they're not going to win those games that way. You have to let him play NFL quarterback and then see what the results are.
yeah. It's not one thing, I think, specifically that is bogging them down. It's a variety of different
Right,
factors at this point.
right.
So let's talk about the opponent, because the Bills are, Josh Allen has started the season really, really well. Had a bit of a dip there in the last couple of weeks, but has since, started to regain form, as is the case for any player throughout the course of a 17-game regular season. The defense in particular, Greg, though, is something that I want to talk about. Actually, let's start with the offense, because they traded for Amari Cooper, and I want to get your thoughts on how he fits in this scheme, because their wide receiver depth was a question after they traded Stephon Diggs to the Houston Texans, and you see them acknowledging that fact by bringing in a player who's maybe not at the peak of his powers in Amari Cooper, but is still
Right.
somebody who can help them based on what their needs are right now.
Well, they don't feel that, other than Khalil Shakir, who I really like a lot, but he's essentially a slot movement receiver, not a true outside receiver. And Coleman, the rookie, has, by the way he's being deployed, they're telling us that he's not quite ready yet. And whether he becomes ready, we don't know the answer to that. But they don't feel that they have a receiver on the outside who can really line up and win versus man coverage. Have that bellwether receiver that, hey, critical situation, sometimes it's just man to man. You need a guy who can win, who can make plays, like the Eagles have with AJ Brown. I mean, they didn't have that guy. So they feel that they needed that player within the context of their offense, and that's why they traded for Amari Cooper. Now, being honest and studying them in detail, I don't think that they do a great job with their concepts either. But on the other hand, if you do have a guy that can win one-on-one, that does change your pass game. But that's why they traded for him, and we'll see how it works. Cooper has always been a guy that has been a high-level talent. It seems every year he has 3 or 4 phenomenal games where he just goes off, and then the rest of the year, not that I hate the phrase, well, he disappears. I don't know what that means, but he seems like he has 3 or 4 just great games every year, and then the other games, they're not big number games, but he still ends up with 1,100 receiving yards. But he's big, he can run, he's smart, he's been around, so it's a good trade.
Yeah, and certainly he goes from a team that is going absolutely nowhere
Ah,
this season in the Cleveland Browns. I mean, Greg,
I just watched them in detail too because I do Eagles stuff, and I mean Deshaun Watson, and again, don't know the kid, but he's not an NFL starting quarterback right now.
far from it at this point, and it feels like it's been quite some time since we've seen him be
Yeah,
that kind of caliber player. So with the Bills defense, McDermott still running the show there. Obviously, they've experienced some injuries and they had a lot of different parts turnover
yeah,
this offseason, but they still do find ways, Greg, to present multiple different looks and try
yeah.
to put quarterbacks in difficult positions.
Yeah, and they're a team, by the way, and again, this going in. So again, now you have to decide. Now it's up to Brian Callahan and Nick Holtz because they're a team that plays a ton of two shell structure. They may play as much two shell safety structure, split safety as any team in the league. Now, obviously, there's nuance to that. Every play's not the same. It's the NFL, but that's what you're predominantly going to get. You know that going in. They're not a heavy man cover one defense. Although I think Bedford, the corner, who normally plays to the field, but sometimes they switch around as they did last week because Douglas normally is the boundary corner, but they don't play a ton of pure man. Bedford's played really well this year. He was a late round pick from Villanova a few years ago, obviously a smaller school guy. He's become a really nice corner. And Douglas is at his best in off coverage because you have to be aware of him. He's a cluer and a keyer. He's one of those guys. He kind of does a his game is what we call reading the triangle. In other words, reading the receiver through to the quarterback. That we call that reading the triangle. That's his game. He clues that really, really well. You have to be careful, because he's one of those guys that if he starts to get a feel for you running, slant routes or glance routes or quick in breakers, you might complete the first two, and then all of a sudden he gets the timing of it, and you throw another one and he picks it off. He's one of those guys.
Yeah, and certainly not ideal if you've got a quarterback who tends to be a beat late on some of his throws.
Yeah, yeah. And not consistently accurate, which is another point that is, you know, I've heard Rich Gannon talk about this a lot. And Rich Gannon, I don't know if you ever talked to him, he's obviously a really smart quarterback guy. And he just talks about, quarterbacks who are muscle bound and how tight they are when they throw and how it kind of limits the range of motion. And it's hard to be really accurate because there's not kind of a looseness and flexibility in the way they throw. This is beyond my, knob. That's why I mentioned someone else.
Sure.
How the body works is way beyond what I know. But, I think there's a lot of people who believe that quarterbacks should not be so built up because it's about flexibility. When you deliver a football, the range of motion with Will Levis is very tight. That's not an X and O point. You can see that, I'm sure yourself.
Yeah. And he's always had that very compact throwing motion.
Yeah,
It's kind of speaks to the larger identity of Will Levis because he is a bit tightly wound from a personality
yeah,
standpoint, as well as from a mechanic and a mechanical and just general movement
yeah.
standpoint as well.
But getting back to the Bills, I would say that I don't want to say they're a vanilla defense because that would not be giving Sean McDermott his due. They're obviously way more detailed and nuanced than that. But, they're not going to give you 10 different coverages. They have a really good linebacker in Bernard, who's turned out to be a really, really good football player. I think Dorian Williams, the second year Tulane linebacker, is starting to play better. You can just see it in the way in which he plays in the run game. He's better. And by the way, I thought the Titans did a nice job in the run game. I would like to see, obviously Pollard had, I believe, 17 carries. Don't forget he had 250 plus carries last year. I'm not suggesting he's Derrick Henry and you
Yeah.
give him the ball 25 times every game. But I think particularly for a short stretch, as you try to get a feel for what your offense really is or can become, I think he needs to sort of be a little bit of the foundation here because the O-line did some good things in the run game. I thought Skoronski did some good things in the run game. Latham was good. Watson making his first NFL start. The kid was a tight end in college. He struggled in pass pro, which doesn't surprise me at all because he doesn't have a lot of experience, but he was okay in the run game.
Yep. Just some penalty stuff there for Leroy
Yeah,
Watt.
well,
Oh,
that's, I mean,
it also
obviously
set
that,
up a 3rd and 19 touchdown run for Tony Pollard, to your
I
point.
know, I know, I know.
You
But
know,
by the way, that also tells you though what they think of the quarterback because there. Look, it was wonderful. It was a touchdown, but that's a give up play.
correct.
You're not expecting a 23-yard touchdown on 3rd and 19.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a term that you ever use at NFL films because it's not a technical one, but that is one that I call the surrender draw in my
That's what it was. It's a give up play. You're hoping maybe he gets 7, 8 yards, you get closer for a field goal, and you go from there. You know, yeah. But I mean, it was actually I forget who made. I think Cushenberry made a great block there on that one, working up to the second level and getting Franklin, and then Pollard did a great job running through an arm tackle and then beating the safety Blackman. With a nice move. Um, but yeah, no, Tony Pollard's a nice player, and like I said even though he had 250 last year in terms of carries, you're not going to give it to him 25 times every single week. But, right now he's kind of the foundation.
Yeah, no, agreed. And compounded with the fact that Tajay Spears has a hamstring injury right now that's got him day to day. We'll see
Yeah,
how much more they lean on Tony Pollard. Of course, you can preview the entire slate of NFL games with the NFL matchup show. Maybe not the entire slate
right.
because Sunday Night
Yeah.
Football, of course.
7 really good ones, though. 7 really good ones.
It's a great weekend.
Yeah.
This is my problem, Greg, with the Titans because people are having fun watching football elsewhere, and that is not my experience here in the last couple of weeks. But that's okay. So that's why I get my fix from the NFL Matchup Show, ESPN, ESPN Plus. Set your DVRs; you can get it on demand as well. What piece in particular would you like folks to pay attention to this?
Well, I think for me, and again, there's some really good games. And by the way, Lamar Jackson is playing ridiculously great football right now,
Yep.
and that needs to be said. That's a big game, Ravens Bucks. That's the Monday nighter on ESPN. But the game that really intrigues me, and particularly on one side of the ball, is Lions O Vikings D. And I've done a piece on that in the show, which kind of reflects the matchup because the Vikings are one of those teams with all their pressure fronts, with all their disguise, with all their late rotation, how many they're going to rush, how many are going to drop into coverage. It's such a great chess match with an offense and a veteran quarterback who's super intelligent and a pass game coach and Ben Johnson, their OC, who's really, really good. So it's almost, one thing I've learned from a lot of coaches, and I hear Bill Belichick talk about that all the time. He's in our building every week. He talks all the time, and you've probably seen some of the clips,
Yeah.
where he says to like Chad Johnson, who's the most important person? It's the offensive coordinator. Who's the most important person? It's the defensive coordinator. So this is a Ben Johnson, Brian Flores game, and I think it's super intriguing.
Yeah, no, from a tactics standpoint, it's going to be a fascinating watch. And certainly, I'm keeping my eye on Detroit and Minnesota because both of those teams are on the Titans schedule this year.
Oh,
I don't know how that's
when
going
is
to.
Minnesota on the schedule? Because
It's like it's mid-November at home, so
okay, because
it's not.
they're a really difficult defense to play against.
Yeah, Brian Flores has got to be rubbing his hands together, thinking
Yeah,
about looking at Will Levis here in a couple of
yeah.
weeks. But Greg, appreciate your insights and your analysis as always. Always good to catch up with you, my friend, and we'll do it again next Wednesday.
Thanks, Buck.